Thursday night. We back.
Thursday night. Good to be back. Clink,
Good
clink, clink.
good to be back. Hey, Brent, let me ask you something. What were you doing? What were you doing in 1971?
I was 2 years old and
Listening to the Bay City Rollers.
what? According to you.
Oh, the deleted scene. That's got to make it out. Oh my God, I laughed so hard when I listened to that.
So what did you say again?
So you had said that when you were in grade 2,
Right.
you were listening to like the Bay City Rollers.
Right.
Grade 2. And
Right.
you're like Bay City Rollers and Kiss was this and that. I'm like, wait. So when you were 2, you were listening to the Bay City Rollers? You're like, when I was in grade 2, you knob. Oh, that makes more sense.
That makes a lot more sense.
We're here to talk about Sticky Fingers.
We are.
Released April 23rd, 1971, 50 years ago this year, Mr.
Isn't that
Jensen.
crazy? Unbelievable.
It was 40 years when we were talking about Van Halen. I think it was a Van Halen album that came out 40 years ago. Or was it Van Halen or Aerosmith? But yeah, they just keep coming. So 50 years ago.
So what did you think of it?
So
I'm very curious about this.
So
let me talk to you about something first. I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
Set this up. So rolling, you understand the general genealogy of rock and roll, right? So the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, all the way down, Chuck Berry, Elvis before that, just the general kind of roadmap.
Right. Yep.
The Rolling Stones, one of the greatest bands in rock history, right?
Yeah.
And, obviously a lot of, Aerosmith came from that. Guns N' Roses indirectly came from that, Van Halen and so on and so on. So the reason why I picked this record was because it was one of the records that kind of started all of that stuff. Okay. But I gave you that one because it was probably the most digestible of the 4 that they did that people say are the best. So it started with Beggar's Banquet. Let It Bleed was next. Sticky Fingers, and then XL on Main Street. XL on Main Street is said to be their zenith. And it's my favorite record. Yeah. However, I think there's 18 songs on it. So it's not the easiest to kind of digest in a short period of time. So I gave you this one, Sticky Fingers.
Yeah, well, no, it's good. It's good. I think it's good you did. I did go back, so I wanted to get a bit of a sense of it as well. So I did go back and I listened to Let It Bleed and Beggar's Banquet. So I listened to those as well before, not before listening to this, but after listening to it, just to get a sense of how these 4 albums were considered to be their sort of their best 4 albums, which is, like Sticky Fingers is their 9th album. Out of all of them. And then there's this kind of just these 4, and that kind of makes sense, right? That kind of makes sense that you kind of get that far along and then you start to become really good. And I think it's kind of crazy that we talk about Aerosmith and Van Halen kind of like right off the bat. Obviously they've been playing for years beforehand. But those albums that they came out with were just fantastic. Has no bearing on why the 9th album of the Rolling Stones happens to be, also considered to be their best album either.
It was a different time back then, when you think about the phases of Rolling Stones, like, we talked about Aerosmith having 2 careers. Right. The Rolling Stones had several, right? So they were kind of, if you remember, they went through the kind of poppy phase, right? That was their entry point. And then they went through a psychedelic phase, much like the Beatles did. And then they went into this phase, like they're kind of rock.
Fully recognized Rolling Stones, sort of like this is I think this is what I think when I think of the Rolling Stones. I think of songs like Brown Sugar. I think of songs like Tumbling Dice and then Dead Flowers and Gimme Shelter, Sympathy for the Devil, right? All those songs, like that's what you think about when you think of the Rolling Stones.
Exactly.
And there's so much more in these. And it's funny when I think about having listened to Sticky Fingers and knowing Brown Sugar and Wild Horses and Dead Flowers and Bitch to a certain degree. But
did you know that song before?
Yeah, but not to. So when I told you I had heard some of these songs, you said listen to it as an album, and it'll have a completely different feel to it. Like you got to listen to the album. Sit down, listen to it. That's the difference, right, between hearing these songs one off, and it truly was something completely different. Like it was incredibly depressing, I think.
Really?
Is the word.
Why is that?
Well, it's just such a drug-filled album, man. It's like drug and heartbreak, and I guess there's positives out of it as well, but there's just so much about it. So let me start at Brown Sugar. Let me start at Brown Sugar with this. Obviously,
let's go. Just go through all the songs, like they're all classics.
So I can't believe it's taken me so long to truly understand what that song is about and to truly look at the lyrics. And I had no idea. Okay. To me, I thought it was about like Brown Sugar. He likes black women, or he likes brown women. It's sort of a song about that, you know? And then actually that kind of is what it's about, but it's pretty extreme. It's to an extreme degree, really, and it's not even about Mick or Keith liking brown women. It's just, it's about rape and slavery. It's all these things. And I'm like, why have I been dancing and singing to this song and not understanding it? And I feel like I'm not alone.
No, you're not. You're not.
Because for forever, I've been singing, you should have heard him just around midnight, right? That's kind of what it's been to me. But it's you could hear him whip her just around midnight. Like,
hear him whip the women just around midnight. Yeah.
So, great rock and roll riff. I just never truly understood what it was about until now.
Well, that song, all the nasty stuff is in there, right? It's about there's drug references in there. There's rape references in there. There's slavery, interracial sex, loss of virginity, like all of it is in there. And it's hard to believe that flew during that time.
Well, I don't even think I would have come to that conclusion, even listening to it, not really even knowing about thinking about the slave trade, right? Even that opening line, right? It's, the Gold Coast, coming in the boat and going to, selling them off in New Orleans, right? It's kind of like, you kind of just sing along to it and you don't really think about it at all.
No, you don't. And that's the scary thing about, this record and rock and roll sometimes in general, is that, when you really kind of peel things back and look at it, it's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
It's pretty extreme. Now, it's pretty extreme to the point where Mick Jagger actually doesn't sing those lyrics anymore because this is a very powerful or a very popular song, Brown Sugar is. And so it's a live staple. And he does not sing Whip the Women anymore. He said in an interview, I think about 5 years ago, he said, I can't believe that I actually wrote that song. Like, I don't know what I was thinking.
And very quickly, to my understanding, like within about 45 minutes, the song was written.
Oh yeah. But there's a beauty in that, right? Lyrics notwithstanding, is that Keith Richards would come in the room and just, can't you hear me knocking? He just started playing. He was playing an open G. Charlie Watts heard him, started playing a beat, and then they looked at each other and were like, wow, this is grooves, man. This is cool. And they kept going. Somebody else came in and added a bit. Like, it just was so natural and organic.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fantastic. It was a special time.
Yeah. And this album came in to, just in thinking about its placement too in history, coming off of the first album after Altamont, which was, a big deal, considered the worst day, in rock and at least live rock and roll history.
So it was a rough, 69 and all those times were rough for the Stones. Brian Jones died under mysterious circumstances. Some people I'd read a book. I can't remember the guy's name, but claimed that Jagger had something to do with Jones's death, because Brian Jones was the leader of the Rolling Stones. He put the band together initially. And there was, kind of a call for Jagger's head at the beginning. People said, well, he's not really a singer. We should just get rid of him. Somebody else can sing,
Wow.
And so Jagger resented that all the way through because Brian Jones agreed. And he was one of the kind of, proposers of that idea. And so there was this resentment all the way through. Jumpin' Jack Flash on Beggar's Banquet, he came into the studio with that song and Jagger mocked him, and played the song and kind of made a mockery of it. And then they reworked the song, stole it from him. And I think they took credit for it. I'm not sure. But anyway, there is speculation that Jagger had something to do with Jones's drowning.
That's insane. That seems crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's speculation.
Okay, well, let's speculate. What, did he see it and didn't do anything?
Those things were just like, talking about big blurs. That whole thing was a big blur. Right. Think about Keith Richards' life. Think about, those guys were just wasted on drugs constantly.
Yeah.
And things would happen and there's no accountability. People were just all over the place and everything was just, it was a big mess. It was a big mess. So
Brown Sugar, it's always been a ton of fun. I just think twice about it now. Anytime I hear it, I don't think I'm going to groove the same way that I used to.
Yeah.
The way, sing along to it the same way that I used to. And, and I also started thinking too, like, is it a heroin reference as well? Right. I think there's a few things in there, with the song that it could also allude to. Especially
this low, like every line virtually there's something nasty in it.
Yeah. And I think, and that's, and even throughout this record is just so, again, there's so many drug references and just, that's why I felt like it was very, very dark. It just felt very like when I, again, the music is great. If you listen to it, it's so like, it feels happy, Sway is kind of this nice, like, great moving, almost ballad as well. And like
Sway.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
It's not really a ballad. Sway kind of reminds me of like a drunk kind of barging into a party, the way that it starts like, bah, 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 bah. It's just like, that is like it's a musical representation of the Stones, really, right? It's raucous and rude and aggressive.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I felt the chorus being much more, it got me in its way. It's kind of this. It's a swang song. Like you get yourself kind of going like this. It's not like a Moonlight Mile sort of a ballad, but it just feels sort of like, it's interesting what they did with track number 2s throughout their career, especially throughout these 4 albums. Well, they just really they toned it down. They came out sort of firing, and then track 2 always sort of felt like they kind of they stepped it back a little bit,
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Like on Let It Bleed. What was you started out.
Well, you're really doing your homework, huh?
Well, I tried. Love in Vain is track number 2, right? And that 2 is a very sort of like, all right, just kind of like you start out, real strong, and then you kind of come back. It's interesting, right? It just feels so different from what we've just listened to in Aerosmith and Van Halen. Yes, they come out swinging, right. And then they kind of keep it going with track 2 and track 3, and then kind of things sort of start to kind of level off a little bit. But it was just completely different taking a listen to Rolling Stones after these guys, because you kind of have to pay attention to the lyrics and to that part of these albums.
While we're on Sway, I love Sway. It's one of my favorite songs on that record. It's one of my favorite Stones tunes, to be honest. And something that I've always said about Sway, Mick Taylor was the new guitar player who came in for Brian Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And he was a fantastic player. Ace Frehley always said that Eric Clapton and Page and Beck and Hendrix were like his main influences, but he always fails to mention that Mick Taylor was definitely had to be one of his influences. You listen to Sway at the very end and that outro, and every one of Frehley's licks from his entire lick vocabulary is in that solo.
Oh yeah, okay.
Like everything. Frehley, he's got a limited vocabulary of licks. He's an exciting player, but it's like, he's got that chromatic thing, like diddle diddle diddle. He does that. The vibrato is kind of Taylor's thing too. Like, listen to that solo again, the outro, and then listen to a lot of Kiss records, and you'll hear all that stuff.
You hear the reference there, right? Yeah.
So Wild Horses.
I mean, I've known Wild Horses for a while, but again, I never really, listened to it. It's just, again, sort of a sad song.
It is, and I think it's about life, life on the road, and how the band, it was kind of funny, right? Because you give that opportunity to any band who's starting out. They're like, oh yeah, we'll be on the road for like 3 years because we love being on the road and touring and blah blah blah. But when you're in it and you're doing it, it's a grind, and it kind of it wears on you, and songs like Wild Horses and Moonlight Mile especially are about that grind and the impact that it has on you as a rock star and keeping up those appearances.
Yeah. Especially as he's, playing shows these guys used to play. I mean, it wasn't playing little club shows. No. It's crazy the kind of people that you end up going and playing in front of. Like you said, Moonlight Mile, I think Jagger really kind of taps into that. To what, who he's playing in front of is, just, and he just wants to go home and, be in warm clothes, throw out his shinies. So yeah, it's, it was, really nice though, to like kind of pay attention to Wild Horses and just kind of feel it a little more.
Did you feel it in a different context when you were more focused on kind of the album orientation?
When I went back through it again, yeah, totally. There's, like I said, like there's something really heavy about this album. There's something like it just, everything about when you start to listen to it in the context of the time and again, what Keith ended up sort of getting himself into afterwards, it just felt very, when you think about that, it just feels very, very heavy.
Yeah.
And then you get into Can You Hear Me Knocking? Also, like, great riff, great rock and roll, and then you're like, the dude's strung out and he's trying to get inside, like, he's high. Yeah
That is one of the greatest, well, for me, one of the greatest rock and roll songs ever. I mean, that is completely definitive of what rock should be. You could, if somebody completely foreign, an alien from another planet came and said, what's rock and roll, I would put that song on for them.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah,
totally, man. I couldn't agree more. And you were talking about this song as being, something where they kind of were jamming and kind of bringing one person to the next person, and everybody would kind of keep adding on to this. I also read that this was like a happy accident, that solo at the end, like that instrumental, like it was like they just left the tape rolling and they were just jamming the entire thing. Well,
the band didn't know. So two things happened. So they stopped the song and you can hear the end, but then it kind of goes into a different, it segues into like congas, right?
Yes.
And it's almost got like a Santana feel.
Yeah.
And then the guitar is consistent. That's what it is. So what happened was Mick Taylor kept playing, because the other guys, everybody else thought that the tape had stopped. So tape stopped rolling because the song in essence was over as they understood it to be. So they all started putting their instruments down. But whoever was in the control room kept the tape rolling. And Mick Taylor didn't know either, but he just kept playing because he was just fooling around. They figured they were just going to do a fade out. And he kept playing. And then the congas kept playing. And somebody was like, hey, okay. And then they started picking their instruments up again, and they got into a full jam.
Yeah. Well, that's because everybody comes in, like the horns come in, like everybody comes in.
But even then, Richards didn't think that they got it all on tape. He thought they were just fooling around, because the guys, and he was walking away, and he's like, okay, I'll keep playing with you guys. And then they wrapped it up, and then they put their instruments down, and they're like, okay, too bad we didn't get that on tape. Hey, you did? Oh, no way. And it was a surprise. It was a complete surprise. Isn't that cool?
That is so cool.
Yeah. So they kept it, and they threw it on the record.
See, I say this too much. You don't get that these days. That doesn't happen these days. You know, like everything is so precise. These guys were spending, I get it. They didn't really have the money, but they weren't thinking about this costing $100,000 at the time, right?
No.
They were in there and they were playing, but that's what it was costing. It was costing 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. I can keep going. Thousands of dollars to record. And these guys were like, oh, did you get it? I don't know. Like,
I know.
It wasn't even a thought. And then we slide into You Gotta Move.
That's a cover, right?
Yes.
I don't know who wrote that.
I got that. Mississippi Fred McDowell.
Okay. Yeah.
I believe was the original. Or so I've got here. Mississippi Fred McDowell reworked this traditional African-American gospel song as a blues track, and the Stones give him songwriting credit on their rendition.
Oh, they do?
Yes.
Can I just tell you a very interesting part about that? Interesting for me and kind of sad to find out. Mick Taylor contributed quite a lot to a lot of the songs on this record, and he got zero credit for it. So Moonlight Mile, he worked that up from a Richards riff. We'll get into that in a second. Sway, no credit for it. And, you know, it's a shame.
Sorry, would that have gone the same for Can You Hear Me Knocking then? Would that, like, probably no credit there?
I don't think he got any credit at all. Anywhere on the record. As a songwriter.
Right.
As a musician, of course he did, but as a songwriter, he did not, I don't believe. And he was pissed about it.
Ultimately led to him leaving the band, right? Was that after Exile he was done? Yeah.
Yeah. Ronnie Wood came in. Yeah.
Well, You Gotta Move. They did a great version of it, and, you know, kind of comparison to what Mississippi Fred did. You know, it's pretty bang on, and, you know, again, just kind of a cool little cool down for the end of side one.
See that? You know, it's funny because that's, you know, we talked about skippers earlier on. We were talking about Aerosmith, right?
Yeah.
That's a skipper for me.
Oh yeah.
You know, and I almost think like, so it's Brown Sugar, Sway, Wild Horses, Can't You Hear Me Knocking, which is like unbelievable. Could have started the record with that. And then You Gotta Move. And I just like, what a side for me, except that last song, number 5.
I think to me that just again embodies sort of who they are and their influence and what they were, you know, they kind of made themselves from was that style of music. So I think it's a nice nod back to what began and how they began. And, you know, I think it's a cool piece to end side one with.
Yeah, I agree in terms of lineage and respect and a nod and a wink and that sort of thing. I just don't care for the song, that's all. But again, that's just my opinion, right? My opinion stops here.
No, I know. I was giving you my opinion, man.
Yeah.
You know, just because then it goes on to Bitch to kick off side 2, which is just like ripping.
That's how a side 2 should have kicked off, right? And if you look at, you know, they did that actually. A lot of side 2s would always start with like a big, you know, Motley Crue did that, Cinderella did that, all those, you know, hair bands did that. You know, you really kicked off the side with a blaster, you know?
Yeah. No, it was good. It was a good one to start with. And it's great. I was just dancing to it with my family. My son, my kids were going great. I never told them what the name of the song was, or how to interpret the lyrics. But
did you say it was called Witch?
Yeah, I should have. But man, just like what a great song. Like you could just, it's just fuck, what a banger, you know, as kids these days would call it, to start off side 2. Yeah, then you get into I Got the Blues, and that's just like, it's just another sad song. That's just like you know, this is like, to my understanding, when things with Marianne Faithfull like were really, this is kind of like that breakup song.
Yeah, she put that out first. She released that song first. And again, burned her on the songwriting credit.
Well, because she also co-wrote Sister Morphine.
I'm not sure.
Is it Sister Morphine and Wild Horses? Or at least Wild Horses.
Oh, you know what? I have that wrong. You're right. She put out Sister Morphine first. That was her song. She released it, I think, on Decca as well, 2 years before. She had a very difficult time because it had the word morphine in the title. and nobody wanted to touch it. And then the Stones took it up a couple of years later, put it out, and they didn't give her a credit on it.
Wow.
And it was like blatantly, it was her song. Yeah.
Started to dislike the Stones.
Shrewd, man.
All this genius, I thought that came from the Stones. But you know what?
I don't know. I don't want to start hating on the Stones. I love them.
Yeah.
But like those were pretty nasty things they did.
Yeah, totally.
You have to admit.
Absolutely.
That's another skipper for me, you know?
Sister Morphine?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I was never really into it. And I know people will be like, what? But
tell Brent right now how pissed you are that he would skip Sister Morphine. Right now. Send in the messages. Leave the comments. I want to hear it. I want to read them. We'll read them next time. If you leave comments, we will read them.
It just wasn't, it was very unimaginative, I guess, I would say. You know, you think about songs like Moonlight Mile, and the song, it's like a mysterious kind of song because they make references where you hear the lyrics and you go, what is he talking about exactly?
Your transgression towards this is that it's too obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But don't you, I don't know. You clearly don't agree.
Well, sometimes I just want things spelled out for me. You know, I feel like there's so much in this album that you can interpret, that you can take, and you can do, you know, just there's a lot of discovering that you can do yourself, that sometimes having it like, you know, this is Sister Morphine and, you know, this is kind of what it is. And, you know, sometimes you just need that opportunity to be like, okay, this is really what he's talking about.
Is that like a millennial thing, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I got no fucking time to try and figure out your lyrics. Just tell me. Just yell it in my face, okay? And you know, and then I gotta say, Dead Flowers, you know, also a big fan of that song. Just again, a nice little country rock, roots rock tune that is fun to sing.
See, that's where Graham Parsons comes in.
Okay.
So Keith, I believe Keith was hanging out with him, and he was Graham Parsons and the Byrds, and they were kind of not country. But then Graham went on to the Flying Burrito Brothers, a couple acts in between that, I think, but got into country and blended country with rock in an alt country way that, if you've heard of Ryan Adams and artists like that today, Graham Parsons kind of was the architect of that stuff, to the point where he grafted country with rock so that they were almost indistinguishable from each other, which is really unique. Because if you think about country at that time, you know, Tammy Wynette and you know, Conway Twitty and all those artists, but a very distinguishable, Loretta Lynn, very distinguishable, depressing type of music, you know?
Yeah.
And rock was not, but he forged those two together in a very unique way. And I think that that's where Dead Flowers came from.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great tune. I love that song.
So do I. It's great. It's a great acoustic campfire song.
It is totally. Yeah. You can just pull it up out of nowhere, and, you know, people, and again, it's kind of one of those Stones songs where it's deep cut. I think we've said this before.
Absolutely.
It's a deep cut, but, you know, I feel like, I don't know. I feel like it's still a song that you can start singing and people be like, I feel like I know that song. You know, just that kind of a familiarity to it as well.
Well, it's simple, right? It's like a D-A-G kind of thing with a C thrown in.
Yeah.
It's a very standard chord progression.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You know, one of my favorite lines in that song is it's in the second verse in your Cadillac, making bets on Kentucky Derby Day.
Yeah, see, again, there's that country singing.
Yeah. In a room with a needle and a spoon, and another girl can take my pain away. I just there's something about that line, the needle and the spoon, and like it's just like, you know, everybody kind of has a vice in some way or another, and I just feel like we can all sort of relate to that. And like, it doesn't have to be heroin, but, you know, it's just that, you know, what is your needle and a spoon, and like just to take your pain away, you know, it just always hits me.
Well, the two most popular vices of rock and roll history, really, right? Drugs and women.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or in Andy Warhol's case, who happened to design the cover, men.
Yeah. True. Very true.
Yeah. Then you round it out with Moonlight Mile. And that's another one. was just listening before we got started, and it was again another one of those songs where I kind of heard it because like that melody is pretty, unforgettable melody for that song.
Yeah.
I'd heard it, but it was never one that I like kind of actually sat and listened to. And man, what a song.
It grows on you.
The horns or the violin, like just the strings, like just like just so great. Sorry, just so
great. That was Mick Taylor's idea to put that string section in at the end. See, no credit.
Jeez.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that song was kind of Richards had pieces of that hanging around, and he called it Japanese thing or something like that, because that doodle doodle doo 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 sounded like a Japanese type kind of riff, right? That acoustic riff, and he was never around. So Taylor took that and went to Jagger, and they fooled around with it, and they built the song from that together. And then, of course, Taylor was not credited, and Jagger played that part, by the way, on the record. When you hear that,
the acoustic,
that main riff, it's on the last two strings of the acoustic guitar. This is very simple, right? Doodle doodle doo 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 doodle doo 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 doo. But that's Jagger playing that.
Crazy. How do you? I mean, just for him to be in that mindset, it's like, look, Keith isn't here. We got to keep this thing going. Not even being a leader of the band, not even being part of the original band, and just knowing what you have and who you have to work with, and going in and making something like Moonlight Mile is just like, what a headspace and like genius headspace to be in.
That's my favorite song on that record.
Oh,
yeah.
Here it is. It all comes out.
Just because it actually achieves what it set out to do. It's an ultimate representation of the anguish and the exhaustion that the band was feeling, right? So when I hear that song, I think about especially that line that goes, "Made a rag pile of my shiny clothes, gonna warm my bones," right? Jagger he sounds exhausted. He sounds anguished. And it's like, I've been, being this rock star, keeping this up for so long, and I'm just so tired. I look at the window, I can see my reflection. I'm wrecked on cocaine. I'm a mess. It's just, and the music perfectly supports it, with the string section at the end. But what's really interesting about the song is that it takes you through that, and there's this huge crescendo right at the very end, right? And then it kind of slows down again and then tapers off. But then at the very, very end of the song, it's uplifting. Do, do, do. And that's how the album ends.
And then what a way to end it, man, because this was a journey. Like I said, I almost feel like exhausted almost, like by the time you end up like finishing it.
Yes.
Just in terms, again, like I just said, this is the heaviness. It just feels like a heavy album. Musically, It feels like you can put it on and dance around to it. But then again, when you understand what's happening around it at the time, where it's leading, what led to it, and it just, all of it is just so like heavy, and just you need a cigarette at the end of listening to it, just to cool out. But you're right, like putting those last few notes at the end of Moonlight Mile, it does, it kind of picks you up, and it makes me think, like, who thinks of it? Like, how can you be so whacked out and then like still be able to put something like this together? How old were these guys? Like 27 at the time of this album?
Thereabouts, yeah. Maybe approaching 30. Yeah.
Like approaching 30.
Yeah. I saw this documentary, and several have been made, but I don't know the name of it. But I remember seeing there was this image of them listening to the playback of Sticky Fingers, right? After it was mixed and mastered and everything. And they were all sitting in the control room. Richards was beside Jagger, and they're sitting there together, and they're just staring into space, right? Listening to Wild Horses play the final, what was going to be released to the public. And I just thought, I would love, to find out what they're thinking right now, listening to this, sitting on this record, which, ultimately would be, among their finest work and one of the greatest rock and roll records of all time. But like listening to the playback and just kind of like staring, and I would love to know what they were thinking.
So what am I feeling? What am I feeling next week?
How about Exile? Exile really is the best Rolling Stones record, if you can believe it, after hearing Sticky Fingers.
Yeah, well, I know a few songs off of this. I know a few songs off of Exile. I know a few songs.
Tumbling Dice.
I know Tumbling Dice. I do know Rip a Joint. That's a ton of fun.
Sweet Virginia.
Yes. So yeah, no, again, it's just context, right? And that's the big thing for me. Because this came out in 72. Okay. Yeah. But that was a big year, 71, to record all this and then get it out in 72. So there's a lot happening up to this. So
but yeah. The cool thing about this record, one of the cool things is how it was recorded. It was recorded in Keith Richards' house in France. And that's where the title comes from, Exile on Main Street, right? They were tax exiles. So they moved to France and recorded this record in his house. And it was a house of horrors. It was crazy. People were coming through there. There were no controls. They recorded at 4 a.m. They recorded at 1 p.m. It was just it was Roman.
All right, man. Awesome. Exile on Main Street.
All right.
Next Rolling Stones album we'll be back with next Thursday.
All right, my man.
Cheers, man. We'll catch you next week.
Cheers, brother.